Now that you understand what a professional practice issue is and the process to resolve your concern, this module will focus on the importance of building evidence through accurate documentation. As stated in Module 1, this toolkit was developed after a lengthy process of assessing best practices in other Canadian nursing unions and from gathering valuable input from our members. Early on in our research, we found that about 33% of members have not filled out a professional practice form before. Members feel they have no time to complete the form and don't know what to include. Members feel the form is too long, too time-consuming, or too confusing. Members don't see value in submitting forms. Unfortunately, many may give up on the process, leaving their concern undocumented or unresolved, which essentially removes the employer's responsibility to address workplace issues. Providing education and information surrounding the significance of professional practice, especially documentation, is one way to remove these barriers and make the process easier to use in your nursing practice. While some other Canadian nursing unions have standardized professional practice forms, RNU does not have such a form at this time. The RNU collective agreement language states that the employer and the union shall agree upon an appropriate reporting form, which means there could be different forms in use between health authorities in the province. Some members voiced that they would like to see a form specific to certain practice areas, such as community health or long-term care, for example. As RNU does not have standardized forms at this time, we have included some tips at the back of the booklet to help you complete professional practice forms in these specific settings. These are listed here. You may find that one form or a combination of several would best capture the concerns in your practice area. Remember, the employer and the union shall agree upon an appropriate reporting form, so it's important to collaborate with the employer in the process of modifying or adopting any specific form. So what is the purpose of a professional practice form? The forms provide a mechanism to identify situations that impact a registered nurse's ability to provide safe and quality care, make recommendations to improve the quality of care, motivate the employer to make the necessary changes, prove that the registered nurse has met their professional standards of practice, and prove the registered nurse informed the employer of the unsafe or unethical concerns. You may be wondering if a professional practice form is the same as an incident report. It is important to note that the employer may have an incident reporting system. This is a separate process and is not the same as filling out a professional practice report. You are required by your licensing body to report unsafe or unethical issues. You can safely do this by engaging in the professional practice process. Chances are, if you are completing a professional practice form, you may also have to file an employer incident report according to employer policies and guidelines. Documentation on a professional practice issue should occur as soon as possible after the event to ensure you can recall the facts surrounding the issue. You may have to do some investigation or fact-finding before you are able to fill out the form. Generally, documentation should include the answers to these questions. What is the issue? Where did it happen? When did it happen? Who is involved? What was missed or delayed? How does it impact the patient? Why did it happen? What do you want the employer to do to address the concern? What standards of practice are at risk? More specifically, the form should identify workload, nursing practice, and patient and/or nurse safety issues, which are outlined in Article 5.02 I and K of the Maine Provincial Collective Agreement. Some tips to document issues in each of these categories are present in the next few slides. How to describe issues with workload. Page 24 of the Professional Practice booklet includes several tips for describing issues with workload. Here are just a few examples. Was the unit over capacity? By how many patients? Were baseline staffing levels met? Accurately describe the number of sick calls, leaves, etc. that contributed to the need for replacement. Did you request and receive replacement like for like? For example, RN for RN? If not, what replacement was provided? What skill mix was required to support the acuity and intensity of patients? Indicate the number of admissions, discharges, and transfers on your shift. What non-nursing duties were you required to perform? How to describe issues that impact your nursing practice. Page 25 of the Professional Practice Booklet includes several tips for describing issues that impact your ability to provide safe care. Here are just a few examples. Describe patient acuity and intensity, as this directly impacts the care you are able to provide. Are there current evidence-based policies and procedures to support your practice? Were you able to carry out your patient care plans? Describe what you were unable to complete and the implications of your patient and/or your practice. Did you have access to professional support, guidelines, and education? Did you care for patients that exceeded your competencies, skills, training, or education? How to describe issues with patient RN safety. Page 25 of the Professional Practice Booklet includes several tips for describing issues with patient or RN safety. Here are just a few examples. Was there a workplace injury or near miss? Did you have safety equipment or training, for example, patient lifts, call bell, etc.? Did your assignment include confused or aggressive patients? Have you experienced nurse fatigue resulting from missed or late breaks, overtime, excessive on-call, for example? Are there security issues? The next few slides will present a scenario that will help tie these documentation concepts together. As we learned in Module 1, registered nurses are responsible to identify and report unsafe or unethical situations. The standards of practice for registered nurses are actually important tools to use in documenting professional practice issues. The standards of practice outline the expected performance required of all registered nurses. Therefore, you need to demonstrate how a professional practice issue may have impeded your ability to perform at the expected level. You need to paint the picture of how the issue impacted the level of nursing care you were able to provide, or describe what nursing care you were expected to take, but were delayed in getting to or missed. Here's the scenario to consider. You work on a busy medicine unit. You had to take on an extra patient assignment today due to one RN sick call, and everyone is working short-staffed. There is no replacement. The morning medications were late for all your patients. First, let's reflect on what the issue is here. Why were the meds given late in this situation? Is it because the RN is incompetent in the area? Were there no clear policies or procedures that guided the RN in medication administration? Is it because the new med cart was locked and no one could open it? The real issue at hand here is workload. The meds were late because of the short staffing, causing an increase in the RN's workload. The increased workload made it difficult to administer all meds in a timely manner. This can snowball into safety concerns for the patient. It's okay if the issues fall into more than one category, such as nursing practice or patient RN safety, as long as you're able to capture the issue or issues in your documentation. The ARNNL standards of practice for registered nurses are broad statements outlining the performance required of registered nurses and define safe, competent, and ethical practice. All registered nurses are responsible to be familiar with the standards. Not every standard or indicator will be applicable in every situation. Consider Standard 1, Responsibility and Accountability. It states, the registered nurse is responsible for practicing safely, competently, compassionately, and ethically, and is accountable to the client, employer, profession, and the public. Under each standard, there are indicators or examples which demonstrate how a standard may be applied in a certain situation. These help us see if a standard is met, unmet, or at risk of being compromised in relation to the short staffing scenario. In the next few slides, we will show how they can be applied in this scenario. According to this standard, the registered nurse practices in accordance with relevant legislation, standards, and employer policies. Is this met, unmet, or compromised? How is it applicable to this scenario? In a broad sense, this standard is being met as the RN is reporting unsafe situations, thereby practicing safely and in accordance with the standards of practice, which is expected behavior of all RNs. However, the increased workload contributed to late administration of morning medications. This compromised the employer policy that establishes standard medication administration times. The professional practice issue is the short staffing caused an increased workload, which contributed to late administration of morning medications. This compromised the employer policy that establishes standard medication administration times. Late medication administration can also lead into patient safety issues. On the professional practice form, you could write, worked short-staffed with an increased workload, which compromised ability to practice. Standard 1, 1.2, in accordance with employer policy. Late medication administration can lead to safety concerns and complications for the patient. This statement clearly demonstrates how the professional practice issue impeded your ability to meet the expected level of performance. It paints a picture of how it impacts the patients in your care. You can look through the other standards of practice and pick any other indicators that apply. Once you start using the standards in your professional practice documentation, it will become easier to apply them in certain situations, and you won't have to look back at the standards as frequently. Once the information is assessed, you may be in a position to answer, what do RNU members want the employer to do to address the concern? Write down your ideas to rectify the situation. Be creative and realistic. This demonstrates the problem-solving nature of the process and your willingness to collaborate with the employer to arrive at a solution. An example might be to hire one permanent full-time registered nurse if the unit is always working short. Another example would be to extend support staff until midnight if you find registered nurses are frequently tending to do non-nursing duties between 1600 and midnight. Here you can see a sample form that has already been completed. This is in the back of your booklet on page 55. The professional practice forms in your area may or may not resemble this form, and that is okay. This is just a generic sample. In your unit or work area, find out where the professional practice forms are kept. If you can't find them or aren't sure, touch base with an RNU volunteer. Be sure to replenish the forms and ensure other RNs know where to find one. What not to document? Do not use the names of patients, staff, or others in completing this form. Details regarding the professional practice concern should not be noted or referenced in the patient record. Avoid emotions, dramatizations, or sarcasm. Don't bring in past situations. Don't blame or disrespect others. Don't try to rationalize. Following these principles will help ensure you have the best documentation and best evidence to support your issue moving forward. Once the form is completed, submit the written complaint to your immediate supervisor and to the PPC as outlined in Article 5.02 I and K. If you are unsure about the PPC, ask an RNU volunteer. You should document each occurrence every time using a new form, regardless if you already submitted a form on the same issue. You must make the employer aware about the issue's frequency and the facts around the situation. If you do not document the issue each and every time it occurs, the employer may incorrectly assume the issue no longer exists, or may underestimate its frequency and resources required to resolve the issue. Documenting can be time-consuming, but you must be patient with the mechanisms that are in place to bring about the change that you want to see. Don't forget to continue following the process outlined in Module 2. Follow up on the form you submitted to see if any action has been taken or decisions made. Continue the process. Documentation is the key ingredient to building the evidence that can enable this change to happen. Close out this presentation and move on to the next learning module. Module 4, Professional Practice Committee.